Order. Okay, everybody, we're all back in full session. Because I mistreated table 13 in the first session and completely forgot about them, I'm going to go back to table 13, but I'm going to take two tables at a time again. I think it helps us get a few more questions into the mix. So we'll go table 13 and table 5, and then if I can ask the roving mic people to be ready for table 6 and then table 10.
Our question is about the National Drug Strategy and staffing. How will the HSE manage to keep staff for this new strategy? And what will happen if there's no staff when the Gardaí are referring people?
Okay, thank you. Table 13 and our table 5, please. No question from table 5, is that okay? Okay, table 6.
Now, our first question is for Tony. I'd like to ask, how does the diversion programme deal with the 90% of drug users who don't fall into a problematic category, e.g. recreational use? As Aisling Golding just pointed out there, we cannot put recreational and problematic use into the same category. So I'd like to again know how the diversion programme deals with that 90%. The question to Justin Kelly, everything you've said is kind of what we're already doing. The definition of insanity, as they say, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So based on your hesitancy to change any of our current legislation, given the power, if you were, Justin, what would you do to change things? How would you go about creating a positive change? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for getting an extra question there from table 6 again. Y'all getting very astute. Just on the first question, I think it's only fair to panellists. I might ask Jim Walsh, who's at the back, who's Department of Health official, and indeed Eamon Keenan, if they want to make a comment, if this diversion strategy, which I've expressed my concerns about it, technical legislation piece of it, but if this is to manifest itself, the issues and the challenges for the HSE and how would they manage that from a resource perspective. Do you want to make some comments, please?
Thanks.
Eamon, yeah.
So it certainly will be a challenge for the HSE to manage a significant influx of people into our treatment services. And I think people were talking earlier in the day in relation to length of time people are waiting already. So we don't have a huge amount of capacity in our services that's waiting for people to be referred. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any waiting lists in place. So initially, in terms of the referrals that we would be getting through the health diversion programme, we have employed 9 extra staff, 1 for each CHO area, and the intention is that those staff would see people for a brief intervention and onward referral if necessary. So if the 10% of people who are offered an onward referral take up an onward referral, then we're going to have capacity issues that we will have to address through estimates process with the government, with the Department of Health. But I suppose that 90% of people will be getting a brief intervention. They will be advised in relation to the harms that are associated with drug use of all types. So there will be that opportunity for people to pause, to reflect, and to have that brief intervention. Those who require onward referral, if they take it, that will be a challenge that we'll have to address when we see the numbers that are coming through the programme and the numbers then that we'll have to go to the Department of Health for additional treatment places subsequently.
Thanks, Eamon. Tony, can I just ask you, I'm sure this has been discussed at the strategy group.
Yes, so in terms of people who we find the 90%, as you described it, with regards to non-problematic drug use. Well, my experience is that in those circumstances, people are spoken to about the illegality, is that right, how you say it, of drugs, and that it's not okay with regards to drug use in that sense. But then also that if they don't have a problem with drugs, that they're explain the risks that they're taking, and harm reduction is advice would be given, and yeah, I think at the end of the day, the risks that people take with regards to drugs are health risks, and that's what they need to understand when they're being engaged with through the assessment and brief intervention, and that, as I understand it, is the intention really. And as Eamon was saying, for those 10% of people that they be obviously offered a treatment and rehabilitation referral, and that not everybody will take that. It's an offer, it's not mandatory. But just to say that that some will take that up, and frankly, it's a better system than the criminal justice system at the moment. So yeah.
I'm sorry, and I'm not sure if I posed correctly as well the other part of your question, which was around the distinction between problematic and non-problematic use. I think you've captured that.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, table 6, thanks. And the other part, Justin, for yourself, if you have the current position which you've articulated, what would you like to see change, or what changes would you see make things better?
Yeah, and thanks for your question. I think on Garda Síochána, it's really important to understand that we are very close partners in the National Drug Strategy, and all the changes that are going on, we're closely involved in them all. So, look, I suppose from the start, examples, naloxone, the expansion of naloxone, we're currently looking at Garda officers having naloxone and the practicalities of that. So that's a drug that will reverse opiate overdoses. So we're being really proactive on that. Looking at that, we're completely supportive of that whole program. We've put an education program in place for our officers so they don't seize naloxone, they don't take it off people. We've put that on our own internal comm system, we've got our own internet type setup, so we've done all that. The adult caution scheme that you heard the Department of Justice talking about, we brought that in 2020 in relation to cannabis. The Department of Justice have said there's a move towards the expansion of that. That will be a matter between the Director of Public Prosecutions and ourselves mainly. And I mean, that's something that we obviously really have to closely look at, because we're treating cannabis differently to the other drugs. And it's I suppose for us, it's the practical implications of how that works around things like drug testing, which we can do ourselves, presumptive drug testing and things like that. The health diversion program that you've heard about here today, obviously, if that comes into legislation, there's a huge change for Garda Síochána in that, and how we work and how we send people toward health diversion. So that's going to mean for us changes in how we work, changes in training, changes in all sorts of type of activity. And if that comes in, we'll obviously be involved in all that. And I think a common theme that we've heard right from the start of the Citizens' Assembly is around education. And for me, like, a key part of that education is in relation to the harm that drugs do, because that seems to be lost on some people. And I know Professor Keenan has often said this: the bottom line is drugs are not good for you. No matter if people choose to consume them, the bottom line, they are not good for you. And there's ample research around there about it. You've heard from health professionals who've talked about cannabis psychosis and all these other things. So for me, increases in education are really important. To emphasize what we've been saying every time we've been here, the close nexus between people who use drugs and the damage that has been occurring in communities, the violence, the organised crime, all the way over to South America. And you probably remember me on the first day talking about the damage to the environment in South America, the murders of human rights workers in South America, hundreds of them murdered. The last 2 weeks in Colombia, 13 police officers murdered. So there's a direct connection between people using drugs here and organised crime here, and the damage that's happening in South America. So that needs to be people need to be educated around that. So, I think there's a lot that can be done in that. Funding for rehabilitation and treatment. And again, I have said that on my last appearance, we're absolutely supportive of increases in that. And I think the final thing, I think everyone would be in agreement from Judge Ryan's presentation this morning, the great potential of the drugs courts and the expansion of that. So I think, look, An Garda Síochána are hugely behind the health-led approach. I mean, and we're willing to work with it, and however that evolves, it's going to mean a lot of changes for us and in our work practices and what we do. But I mean, we've always been innovative and adaptable. So, like, I suppose your comment around doing the same thing in madness, I don't agree with that, because I think we've done a lot of changes. I mean, this weekend, Electric Picnic, the back of house testing that's going on, we're involved in that. The supervised injecting facilities that are going to come in, you can imagine the difficulty that is going to be in that for us in policing. So we are going to have people who for health reasons, are going to be in a safe place where they can inject or where they can use drugs. And we have to manage the policing of that area and the communities in that area and all the work that goes with that. So you can imagine how complicated that is for us. But this is something that we support. So we're supporting all these measures that prevent people losing their lives from drugs overdoses. And I was on Thursday. It was the National Overdose Remembrance Day, and I was at an event in relation to that. Like we support all this. No one more than An Garda Síochána knows the damage that drugs do, particularly in the deprived communities, and particularly for those really problematic drug users. I mean, like I said, we have no interest. They are not our focus. Our focus is on the people who are making lots of money, who, as Shamie Boland told you this morning, are involved in money laundering, human trafficking, firearms offences from the money they're making from all this, prostitution. All those things are connected. So that is our absolute focus in the Garda Síochána, and it's not on targeting drug addicts. We do not do that. That's not our.
Okay.
That's not our. Thanks.
Thanks. No, and look, thanks for a really actually comprehensive list of the various initiatives that you put in place and are putting in place within An Garda Síochána, indeed with other agencies. And again, I will restate in case it's ever misinterpreted, we do fully appreciate the work of you, your colleagues who put yourselves and your lives at risk every day of the week going to work. So let that not go understated. Okay, can I just move to table 10 if I haven't called you, and if the micers can get ready to go to 8 and 12 after that.
How you doing? Justin, in relation to, we were just discussing here some of the aspects of what the talk was, three of you gave, and the point made was here that none of us here would like to be a guard. When I was a young fella, being a guard was a reasonably easy job, but today it's a really difficult job, and it's well documented that there are significant issues in the guards today. So how do you see that going forward, or have you the funding in place to take care of what's going on today, or to support your Garda force?
Yeah.
Sorry, just on that as well.
Yeah.
Just for Mark, in relation to housing, how do you manage the housing process for people on probation, taking into account that we have a serious housing issue and we can't house the people, we say, who are outside of that remit? And just for Tony, in regard to the drugs remain illegal, is that part of that? Is that just some clarity around that? So is this forum here for discussing that, or is that going to be taken into account when that's happening?
Okay, I'm going to give Justin a break for a minute, gather his thoughts on the resourcing issue. Maybe we'll go to Mark first on the housing, and then Tony, and then Justin, and then we'll go to the next two tables. Just brief, please, guys, if you can. We'll try to get as many more in.
Housing remains a critically difficult area for everyone in the society, obviously, and for us, it is no less than that. As an example, our homeless team in Dublin is carrying 500 cases. So in the absence of stable and suitable accommodation, it is challenging for those people to move forward into more productive activity. We do fund a range of housing providers for particular areas of our work. So DePaul Ireland, McVeary Trust, Focus Ireland and the PACE organisation provide us with targeted accommodation for certain categories. But obviously we work with local authorities and with our colleagues in the prison service to support better outcomes where possible, particularly targeting where we have vulnerable or higher risk cases.
Do you want to come to the other
Yeah,
question?
sure, thank you. So in terms of drugs remaining illegal, that's what's planned. I can't tell you what the legislation is going to look like because it hasn't been drafted yet, but drugs will remain illegal. And I suppose what we've described is, I know tomorrow you are all going to be doing a workshop and you're going to be looking at this very issue. And as I understand it, it's what I've described as probably Model C and a bit of Model D perhaps in terms of the health diversion program. And in terms of what you recommend, I think that was the kind of tail end of the question. Is it your role to recommend something? Well, yeah, that's up to you guys to work through it tomorrow and have a look at it and decide whether what I've described has gone far enough or not far enough, or for, whatever you guys decide. I think that's for you, and that's why I suppose one of the areas that the Citizen Assembly is looking at, and that's why it was important to talk about it today.
Thanks, Tony. Point well made. Just on the whole issue, the multiple challenges coming at you, resourcing, general challenges.
Thanks very much for that question, and I suppose I really appreciate you bringing that to the fore. And I suppose we ask our young men and women in policing in Ireland, I suppose they're dealing with the bad and the really sad in society. They're dealing with people that most of us do not want to deal with. So we're asking to do that. It's a really challenging career, and all the well-documented recent attacks on officers, you know, my hat absolutely goes off to those young men and women that go out and work 24 hours a day. So look, at senior management level, we try everything we can to support them, to provide them with the right equipment so they can do their job safely. And around resourcing, I suppose modern day policing, we've got so many demands on it. So we've all these extra crime types that we never had before. So we're dealing with things like cybercrime. We're dealing, obviously, increasing the work we're doing around domestic violence, crimes against children, stuff that we didn't have as many staff in as before. So that's all, I suppose, pressures on our frontline numbers. So the reality is, do we have enough people at the moment? No. And the Garda Commissioner has acknowledged that. And we are doing our very best to recruit more people into the organisation, to retain more people in it. And we're obviously looking at lots of different ways to do that, around extension of retirement age, increasing the age limit of people to come into the organisation. So, you know, like I say, really challenging, but we're absolutely up to the challenge of that. So, like I said at the start, I really appreciate that question and, you know, your acknowledgement of what a challenging career it can be. Thanks.
Yeah. And Justin, you've certainly made it much clearer for me as well, because as more and more government policies come into play, domestic violence, you've rattled off a few of them there, and cyber, the more resourcing you need. So while the current figure is 14,000, is it, Gardaí? It's 14,000 with multiple extra demands on it. So you've made it clearer for me and me. So where am I now? Table 8 and then table 12, I think I gave indications. Table 8, any question? And it's okay if you're don't have a question. Table 8.
Yeah, we just kind of had the same question as the previous question. We were a little bit confused about how there's a national drug strategy and we're putting pressure on the guys back here to implement it. And then we're here in the middle trying to make recommendations about something that seems to have already been decided.
Yeah, look, it's good. And it's a good point. And look, I can just make one comment as chairperson. We have a complete mandate to look at this from a clean slate perspective. So we can absorb what is in the pipeline. We can equally look ahead and say, well, that's not good enough, as Tony has expressed, and say, actually, even if that was in place, we've more recommendations to go. So we have a clean slate in terms of our mandate, and Tony has expressed that very well. But look, thanks for reiterating it. So table 12, did I? 12?
Did Mr. Keenan mean that there would be 9 people employed to help with referrals for people with drug addictions? Is that for the whole of Ireland? 9 people.
Sorry, Eamon, that was the point around the CHO, community health organisations. Do you want to clarify that? Sorry, the mic.
Sorry. Specifically in relation to the health diversion programme, there will be 9 people employed, 1 for each CHO area. We currently have 9 CHO areas, so each CHO area, if an individual comes, the plan is that the individual comes to the attention of the Gardaí through possession of drugs for personal use. That person is then referred to a SIR worker in their CHO area for an assessment. So in terms of the numbers coming through, we'd be looking at that, but this was the initial ask for us, was to put in place a service for the health diversion programme when the legislation eventually gets put in place for us to operate that health diversion programme.
Okay, and again we can come back to resourcing as well. Just the next 2 tables, if I can, call table 2 and table 14, just to get ready, and maybe table 3 after that, just to help the roving micers. So table 2, 14, and then 3, 2.
Grand. Tony, just want to check with you, is there any specific targeted work within the health diversion programme around women's issues?
Actually, Tony, can you just hold
Yeah,
it? And if I can, table 14.
Would the decriminalisation for possession reduce the powers of stop and search? If so, what would the Assistant Commissioner think the effect would be, especially on dealing?
Okay, so two really good questions. And first one, Tony, you think to yourself in terms of...
Yeah, sorry. In terms of women's issues, I mean, currently within drug services in Ireland, there are programmes that focus in. People will be, men and women will no doubt be found in possession of drugs and will be referred. There has been no particular mention of women's issues under the discussions we've had so far, but of course, women will be referred to treatment services or offered, specific intervention when the brief interventions happen. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's something that all drug workers will be aware of.
Okay, and Justin, can I just ask you the question around any decriminalisation, if we were to recommend it, would it reduce the powers of search for possession?
Okay, thanks for that question. So basically, if there was a legalisation of drugs, the power that we have under Section 23 obviously wouldn't be available to us anymore. So that power under Section 23 that we currently use, as I said to you, we only use that if we reasonably suspect people are in possession of drugs. And
sorry, Justin, that was legalisation, you said.
Yeah.
And I think the question that was asked is decriminalisation, would that reduce?
Well, I suppose the devil is in the detail. We'd have to see the legislation to get a good idea of it. But what I would say is Section 23 is a really important power for us, because while we might search someone on suspicion that they have controlled drugs, other offences often arise. So we might interact with someone and we'll find out there's a bench warrant for their arrest. That means they haven't shown up in court and it could be for a very serious offence, say, example, an aggravated burglary. So I suppose one of the things is it helps us engage with people and interact with people who are involved in crime. And I know, so I can give you a really good example. Our colleagues in Canada have told me their power of search has been absolutely eroded. So what they have the situation now is they've given me examples such as someone would ring into the police and say, there's someone at the bottom of my driveway or my garden and they're injecting heroin. I want now to walk with my children to school. Can you come? And the police will say, we have no power to interact with that. That is perfectly legal. We have no power to come and search that person. So that power of search is gone. So the Canadian police have told me, that has been absolutely devastating for the work they can do, because they even go, when they even go to engage with people who would be suspects, those people are very strong to say, you have no right to engage with me, drugs are legal here, don't even speak to me. So in Canada, they've had a real difficulty around how they engage with people on the street. And like I say, that power that we have is one, that's our most common power of search that we probably use. It's one that's used all the time. So if that were to go, as Ben Ryan from the Department of Justice said on the very first day, that would be put us in a really difficult position.
And again, I think your opening comment, the devil is in the detail in terms of what the legislation, because Canada went a certain way, quite liberally and quite in a legal basis.
Yeah, and sorry, Paul, if I could just add, in Portugal, and as I said earlier, their system, the drugs still remain illegal over there, while they have that health diversion scheme in place. The police still there have absolutely still full powers to stop and to search you. So those powers aren't gone. So in Portugal, the police retain those powers. So I suppose it's a really important thing. And again, when I visited Lisbon a few weeks ago, the police were saying that is essential for them to operate. They can still do that. and that's how they actually interact with people and how they end up diverting a lot of people into their model of diversion. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Justin. And look, just I have one table left, table 3. I won't have got to table 7, 4, and 14. I don't think, but just that's table 3 for now.
How's it going? This question's for Commissioner Kelly. Just a question around, you alluded to electric picnic on the weekend, and you were talking about the drug testing facilities there, but it was also publicly stated this week that there'd be no amnesty shown to festival goers this weekend. Does that not create a deterrence for people to actually want to give up their substances because they'd fear the criminal justice system? Also, on the back of last year, Cron had posted some cases of people who had received court dates after being caught with cannabis possession at EP last year. And another thing that I was made aware of yesterday was the presence of sniffer dogs in campsites altogether now last month. Where does that fall under the Stop and Search Act, and is that not a breach of personal property and privacy?
And I will, Kyle. Sorry, just I'm going to ask one more table, and I'm also going to ask Eamon to come in with just on that question. But table 4, so we can just then have table 7 and 14. I promise I'll give you priority tomorrow, if even now. Table 4.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I suppose the question that we had here was just in relation with the health-led approach and using the CHO system. And I just had a question of practicality because, for example, CHO1 consists of Donegal, Sligo, Galway, Mayo, Roscommon. And if someone was, say, being referred to the service and the person is based in Galway and I'm having somebody who's in possession in Donegal, which is a 4-hour trip, how do I refer them on? How do I justify what exactly they're going to benefit from that brief intervention service? So it's just, we're kind of questioning the practicality of it.
Okay. Tony, can I ask you on that one first, just in terms of consideration, just go back to the one resource per CHO area, and a great question. And then we'll move into the other, and I will be calling Eamon on the electric picnic piece. You can come in again if you want. But firstly, Tony, on that one, if I can.
Yeah, I think there's time to figure these things out. You know, the legislation isn't in place, and we don't actually know when it will be in place. But anyway, we've totally discussed that already. The opportunity that the practitioners, the coordinators, if you like, represent right now is the engagement. One of their roles is to find referral pathways for people and to establish those. I think they can get out there and explain what the health diversion program will be when it comes, and I think that we can do that work. And in those rural areas, which that problem is enormous. Like, I mean, you know, regardless of their health diversion program, in my other hat on Analyfi, we drive people from Limerick to Dublin 5 hours round trip, etc. So it's not lost on me. But I think that I don't have the answer to that, and I'm not sure. I can't speak for the HSE, but I think the opportunity is now to figure this all out, and I'm sure that's being noted elsewhere, that the kind of questions being asked here today.
And look, again, to state the mandate, we have a clean slate here. We may not be able to design and determine resources, but if we see that something is not significant or enough, that's in our remit to recommend. But great question. Just on the electric picnic, a range of issues Kyle just posed there. Justin, and I might just ask Eamon, who's spending his weekend in electric picnic, but he's forfeited a few hours to give to us today. But Justin, do you want to make any comment first, and then?
Yeah, sure. I suppose there's a lot in your question, though. I suppose drugs currently are illegal here, so us as An Garda Síochána, we cannot give an amnesty or any type of de facto amnesty. That's completely outside of our gift to do that. But in relation to the back of house, how that is working, and Professor Keenan will fill you in on the detail. Our involvement in that is we are aware that people will leave drugs into the HSE who will test them, and if they are really dangerous, then they will advertise it around the concert sites to ensure people are aware not to use this particular type of drug, and they send out warnings, and I saw one yesterday. So what we have agreed with the HSE and with the organisers is we will not police tightly around that area where we know drugs are going to be left into that tent. So we've taken, I suppose, a common sense, discretionary approach to it. And And I suppose our whole purpose is, if we can alert people that they don't take substances that might seriously harm them or even kill them, of course it's something that we want to be involved in. But I mean, like I've said a few times, whatever the legislation is, we will police it. But we cannot give amnesties, or we cannot decide we're going to enforce parts of the road traffic legislation or parts of the drug legislation or part of the theft. You know, that's the rules that the people of Ireland have put in place through the legislators. So that's what we police. And if there's a change to any of those, we obviously change with that.
Thank you. Just some, Eamon, do you want to make some brief comments if you can, please?
God, brief. Okay. Yeah, you said I had a choice about being at Electric Picnic or here, and obviously I can't say which I would prefer to have been at, you know. But so I was at Electric Picnic all day yesterday and working in conjunction with Garda Síochána and the festival promoters to provide a safe space for people to interact with HSE professionals and volunteers. So, I mean, I don't know if people know of the setup, but I know that this narrative that's been circulating on social media about, oh, no amnesty, or you're going to be arrested, guards are waiting outside. And I saw a post today, the guards are waiting outside the HSE tents. Nothing could be further from the truth. What happens is, when an individual goes into our tent at Electric Picnic, they interact with our volunteers, our trained volunteers and our paid staff there to talk about issues in relation to drugs. If that person decides during the course of that conversation to submit a sample of their drugs into a bin, we facilitate that. It's a healthcare facility, it's a healthcare space. And so very much like if you go in to see your GP to talk about drugs, you don't expect a guard to be sitting in the corner listening to what you're saying. So we're providing a healthcare space at Electric Picnic that's supported by the festival promoters, and Garda Síochána know what's going on. We then take those drugs, if they are submitted, we analyse them on site and we put out alerts and information, risk communication information to people at the event to promote safety in conjunction with Garda Síochána. We did one last night, and this afternoon, as we were talking here today, I sent out another one in relation to cocaine. It was being sold as cocaine, it wasn't cocaine, it was a different drug, and we put out another risk communication. So this is about getting information out to people in real time to promote safety and harm reduction.
Thanks, Eamon. Thanks, Eamon. And your colleague the last time did outline the great innovation that whole process is between yourselves and Garda Síochána and other agencies as well. So we should remind ourselves there is some really good innovation going on all of the time. Okay, I'm conscious we have eaten into your time for deliberation back at table, but there's still about 10 or 12 minutes or so for you to take time and just reflect back at tables. And then we will regroup at 17:10 or so, and we will wind up on the last very brief session. So, and I will say table 7 or 14, you have ultimate priority tomorrow for first questions straight out of the blocks.